So these are all the communication cables which are included with the battery, and you actually don't need any of these adapter PCBs, whatever that is, and you don't need this cable here, and this is a very short, I don't know what that is for, so you don't need any of that. What you need is the USB to UART interface, and then you've got the, it's like an old RS232 connector or something, but it's not RS232 in this case, and the other side has the RJ45 to connect to your BMS. So these are the only two I have used so far. Connect these together, this plugs into your computer and this into your BMS, and then it talks RS485, and then you can see all the lights flashing as well. But I would not recommend using this either here. It is not working reliably. Welcome to yet another video here from the Off-Grid Garage in sunny Australia. It's not super hot, but it's nice and sunny, and this is what we need for our solar project. Yeah, as I have just shown you, these are the ingredients which came with the cable and adapter overload, which came with the QSO battery. But this construct does not work correctly with their software. It is, if it connects, it is very slow. Most of the time it doesn't connect. It can be delayed by up to 20-30 seconds. Sometimes it drops out and doesn't even tell you. So what I'm doing is I'm using the Seplos 485 adapter USB and use a normal LAN cable to connect to one of the RS485 ports of the BMS, and this works just fine for the communication. So I also want to plug in our self-made Type A cable to the can. So from last night's fallout, I'm still charging the QSO battery from the Seplos batteries using the big power supply. But the QSO battery is not connected to anything at the moment apart from the RS485, the can, to our servo, and also the charger. And I think we should be at around 95% now. We are close to 54 volts charging voltage, 34 degrees inside. So, and these are all the files you are getting with the software. The whole software doesn't need to be installed in a computer, it's just an exe file, so very similar to the Seplos. And there's a data folder which contains only 2 files, and there's also an image folder which contains the images, like the state of charge images from 0 to 100%. The driver I needed to download from the internet actually for making this USB to UART controller work. It's not a plug-and-play device under Windows 10, but you can just Google it and find it very quickly and download the driver. So you're starting the software by double-clicking on the exe file, and there it is. So here in the bottom left-hand corner you set your COM ports, and it already says down here communication OK, but it says address fail, because we need to change the DIP address from 1 to 0. And as soon as you do that, it connects to the BMS straight away, gives you all the information. And this would not happen with the provided adapter and cable the battery came with. It would take like forever to connect, and then the refresh rate was sometimes 20 to 30 seconds. While this one here is spot on, every second you get your new data. So down here we have the color coding. Red is the highest cell, green is the lowest. Everything in yellow is balancing. Sending, receiving status. These are the packages sent back and forward. So you can see the communication is working. Over here we've got the communication, okay. We are charging at the moment. Here we've got one of these graphics, 100%, we are at 96.4%. We can see the MOSFET status, charging is on, discharging is on, and we are currently charging. There's also a heat status and a fan status. Neither of these options are built into this battery. So then here on the left hand side, there was just a hiccup. Could you see that? Communication just went away for a second and then came back. This happens constantly with the other provided adapter. So here on the left we can see cell number 1 to cell number 16, cell voltages. We can see the pack voltage, the average cell voltage, maximum, minimum cell voltage, and the difference. So all the information together, very nice. And here in the next column we can see how many cycles the BMS has counted, the full battery capacity, and the remaining battery capacity Since the test yesterday, we know this is not a column counter. This is just what the software calculates, which it assumes it's a guess, it's an estimate how much remaining capacity you have. So the state of charge may be more or less accurate because of that. Remaining charge time as well as remaining discharge time, it gives us all the temperature sensors. So 4 on the battery as we have seen in the video yesterday, then 1 in the BMS, and 1 is the ambient temperature measurement inside the box. The current at the moment is 9.7 amps into the battery, state of health 100%. Then the next main tab at the top here are the parameters. And this is where it gets a bit tricky with the BMS, because as I told you yesterday in the video, the BMS is locked down. We cannot change any of these parameters here. Here in the bottom right, there is a password field, and you have to know the right password to change any of these parameters. So everything is pre-configured, nothing is changeable. And this is where I asked a question in the community tab of my YouTube channel a week ago. Would you buy such a battery which is locked down? And 74% of the 1,600 replies I got on this poll said, no, I wouldn't, because I paid for it. I want to have full access to the battery, to the BMS. But let's be fair and give it a go, and let's have a look at the parameters and what they think is a safe measure, because they told me some customers have altered these settings here and damaged the battery with that, and then claimed it back with them under warranty. So hence they decided to lock down the BMS so people cannot change any parameters anymore. Alright, welcome back to part 2 of this video. I'll put this all in one video because it's all BMS related. As you have seen, I haven't posted any videos for the last 4 days or something, 5 days. This was how long it took me to understand how the software works and to discuss things with QSO. It is like pulling teeth. And again here, it is the same situation as we have with the Seplos. It is a communication problem. They don't quite understand what my question is about. Even I break this down to really simple things. And then they give you information which are actually not... Welcome back to sunny, hot Australia. Amazing. When I start a video, yeah. Okay, I'll try again in between these showers. Insane. So yeah, it is very, very difficult to get the right information from QSO about this battery, the BMS, the settings, how everything works. Anyway, more about this later. Let's dive right into the parameters. We want to have a look at the parameters. So, in the parameter tab here, we can see we have got 2 sub tabs. One is for the protection parameters and one is for the alarm parameters. So that's very good. I like this idea. And they also have grouped, categorized all the parameters: cell voltages, pack voltage, current, temperature, and other. And the same for the alarm: cell, pack, current, temperature, other. So this is very consistent. I like this very much. Now, I had a look at these parameters here, which show up right here on the screen, and I said, well, this is not going to work. This is really bad. But I made a mistake at the beginning and thought these are the parameters of the BMS already, because, well, quite frankly, we have connected to it and are communicating with it. But no, the parameters here, this is just a selection. I don't know where these are coming from. These are some default parameters which were already in the program or something. I don't know where it pulls this information from. But anyway, you have to click on the read button here to get the right information. And then it pulls all the information from the BMS into the software first. And this took me already 1.5 days to find out. And then I got confused because most of them are now red. And the red lines apparently are the parameters QSO has changed from what was displayed before, from these default parameters. So these are the ones they have been changed, but they are now in the BMS. I know, right? Okay, let's have a look at some important ones, like the cell overvoltage start protection at 3.65 volts. This is when the BMS would shut off the charger, and it turns it on at 3.5 again. Same undervoltage protection, 2.7 turns off the discharging, and at 2.9 2.95, it turns them back on. So these parameters are quite good. So they give us maximum capacity of the battery. So I'm not complaining about these parameters here for the cell voltage protection. For the pack, 58.4, which is 3.65, if all the 16 battery cells would be 100% calibrated, and it turns the charging back on at 54 volts. Under voltage at 43.2, and it turns on your inverter again at 47.2 volts. So no complaint, all good. So the current protection, this is where it gets a bit tricky, because you can see they have changed a lot of these parameters here, and I'm not 100% sure what kind of BMS we actually have in this battery. Is it a 200 amp BMS or is it a 250 amp BMS? The answer is still outstanding. It is outstanding. Anyway, and then we can see here a charge over current 1 start, and down here is a charge over current 2 start. And I was asking the question, why do we have 2 parameters for starting the overcurrent protection? Apparently this parameter here is just an alarm, while the number 2 is when it actually triggers and turns off your BMS. So I was asking the question again, well, why do we have an alarm tab here if one of the alarms is already displayed here under the protection? Because if we have a quick look in alarm, we can see there's also a charge over current start, which is on 102 amps. So, and again, the answer, I have not received the answer yet. I don't know. So what they are saying is it alarms at 200 amps and it would disconnect your inverter or your load at 250 amps. Discharging is 210 amps alarm and 250 disconnect your inverter, your load. So from these parameters, I assume it's a 250 amp BMS, which would be amazing. Because all these Seplos BMSs, they all have 200 amps maximum. And this is mostly important if you have only one battery, like the QSO battery, and you want to pull a really high load. 200 amps at 50 volts, that's 10 kilowatt already. And the charge over temperature disconnect sits on 65 degrees. And at the beginning, I thought, well, 65 degrees is a bit too high for these battery cells, yeah? And I had a look at the EVE LF230 specification sheet, and I was right. Pulling this one up, it says charging working temperature 0 to 60 degrees. So up to 60 degrees we can charge the battery, which is totally insane. And discharging as well, 60 degrees. So here we've got a parameter which is completely wrong. So this should be at 60 degrees, or I would even set this one to 50 degrees maximum. I mean, this is already so hot, and it would allow charging again at 55 volts. So these 2 parameters I would really like to change 10 degrees at least down. And the discharge over temperature is at 70 degrees, which is again 10 degrees higher than the specification of this battery. And then at 60 degrees, it allows discharging again far too hot. And then we come to the charge under temperature start. This kicks in at -5 degrees Celsius. So at -5 degrees Celsius, we can still charge the battery. Looking at the specifications, definitely not. 0 degrees, then we should cut off. So this parameter should not be at -5, it should be at +5 degrees. And the charge under temperature recovery should be at about 10 degrees or so. So again, a wrong parameter here, what is programmed in the BMS. The discharge under temperature, so the maximum or the minimum temperature we can still discharge the battery, sits on -20 degrees Celsius. And we have a look here. This actually sits at -30 degrees. So this is well within the specs. Then we have the BMS over temperature protection is at 110 degrees. Okay, I don't have any information about this BMS, so I'm not sure if this is a good value or not. It sounds very high. And we've got an environmental over temperature protection at 70 degrees, which is the actual case temperature. If the case is 70 degrees hot, it will stop charging or disconnecting the battery then anyway. And again, 70 degrees, far too hot for my taste. You won't be able to touch the case anymore. Then we've got a ambient under temperature protection of -25. I'm not sure what that actually does. Does it stop charging and discharging at the same time? Well, if so, it is far too low. It should be at +5 degrees or something then. And then we have our balanced start voltage here at 3.45 volts, which is perfect. This is spot on. With a deviation of 30 millivolt. I would set this one here to 5 millivolt because the balancer is only like 150 milliamp passive balancer again. If it balances, let it balance, you know, don't stop at 30 millivolt, let it balance down to 5 millivolt. And then there are some other parameters for sleep voltage and standby voltages. I'm not 100% sure when they kick in, so don't know if these are good or bad parameters here. Okay, so far the protection parameters, so they are not too bad, except of the temperature parameters. They are all off. They are far too high or far too low, and they should be changed. The current parameters seem to be fine. If it is a 250 amp BMS, again, we don't have the information. There's nothing on the website, nothing in the manual, which are linked down below. It only says a continuous discharge current of 220 amps, so I assume it's a 250 amp BMS, and then the parameters are fine. Okay, let's have a look at the alarm parameters. And again, we need to read all these parameters first. And there's no red color shown. So QSO has not changed any of these parameters. And well, what can I say? The first one at the top here is at 3.7 volts. This is just an alarm, right? But why do we turn off the battery already at 3.65 volts? As we can see here, this is the protection setting. 3.65, but the alarm comes on at 3.75. This makes no sense at all, right? This should come on at 3.6 or 3.55, whatever you want to set it to. But 3.7 is far over the turn-off voltage already, so this parameter is wrong. Again, these are just alarm parameters. 2.8 would be the alarm comes on at 2.8, and when we have a look at protection is at 2.7, so this seems to be working. And the pack over voltage alarm 57.6, so this is again well under the turn-off voltage of the whole pack. And the other one is at 45, this is above the under voltage protection setting. Then I'm not sure how the current alarm works, because they claimed, well, the charge over current 1 is already your alarm, but then we've got another 102 amps sitting here. What are they doing then? Do we have 3 parameters for the overcurrent alarm and 3 for the undercurrent? This is all clear as mud. Answers are outstanding. And if it is a 250 amp BMS, you don't want an alarm at 102 amps, right? You definitely not. And same for the discharge overcurrent. 102 amps is far too low. If it's even a 200 amp BMS, it's far too low. Okay, the temperatures, well, they are still very high. I would set them lower. 55 degrees is an alarm for the over temperature. This should be sitting like 45 or something. The under temperature should be at about 10 degrees, I guess, but -5 is already in the damaging part where you shouldn't charge your battery at all anymore. So all these temperature settings need to be revisited and changed. We've got the environmental at 55. And on here we've got an interesting, let me just make this column a bit wider. We've got a capacity low warning alarm at 20% state of charge. So I think this is a good parameter, but well, it doesn't work. You know, as we did the first initial discharge capacity test of the battery, which didn't work, I was down to 12% and there was never an alarm coming up, neither in the software nor in the Victron system, nothing. And we also have a voltage different alarm. This is when the deviation across all your 16 cells goes above the 800 millivolt they have put in here. You will get an alarm, then something is wrong with your battery. And these are pretty much the standard parameters which were already programmed on the BMS. So if we go back into the live view now, so we are at 55.2 volts absorption voltage. And you can see cell number 16 is at 3.62 volts, but there's no alarm. Because, as you remember, the alarm is set to 3.7. So we wouldn't even get an alarm. There's no alarm, there's no protection, nothing. It is still just sitting there and balancing now, but no alarm whatsoever. And you can also see the deviation is at 240 millivolt at 55.2 volt. This is not even a high voltage charging. This is 55.2. This is just out of the knee, out of the curve, out of the flat area of the curve into the steeper area. And then I stopped charging with the solar charge controller now, and it is now balancing. But I have this status here running on this battery for a few hours now, and the deviation has not come down yet. Even we are not charging anymore into the battery, it just holds the voltage there, but the deviation does not come down off the battery. So again, a passive balancer with 150 milliamp is not capable of balancing these high capacity battery cells, unless you have really certified battery cells and they are super totally matched and the drift is not as high. So I probably have to manually balance them at some stage here. Otherwise, this won't get better. It will only get worse. Okay, guys, so far the, this video about the default parameters which came with the BMS. And again, the whole reason to lock down this BMS and make it non-accessible for their customers was some customers have changed parameters, damaged the battery, and then claimed warranty with QSO. So they decided to lock down the BMS. But from what I can see here from these parameters, they are damaging the battery anyway. Especially the temperature parameters are not as per the specifications of the EVE cells. To be honest, while I can understand what they are trying to do here to prevent warranty claims coming in because people have fucked up the settings and destroyed their batteries, locking down the BMS is not the solution for that. Definitely not. 100% not. And let's just quickly go back here to the computer. I want to show you the in the alarm tab, we've got the pack over voltage alarm. We've got the charge over current start. And we've got the discharge over current start. And I want to show you something here with these rear parameters in mind. These are the parameters of the BMS in the Victron system. If the BMS is connected via a type A cable, which I have done. And you can see here the charge voltage limit is at 57.1. And our charge voltage limit, or the pack over voltage alarm, is on 57.6. So this is exactly half a volt over what will be reported to Victron. The charge current limit CCL is on 51 amps. And our charge over current alarm is on 102. That's exactly half of what we set in the alarm. The discharge current limit DCL in the Victron system sits on 92. Our discharge over current alarm in the BMS is on 102 amps, so 10 amps lower. Yeah, exactly, right? Have you got this déjà vu as well now? So this is all very, very similar. They're using the same formulas here as the Zeplos BMSs. And I wouldn't be surprised if both BMSs come from the same manufacturer. The software behavior parameters are a bit different here, but the behavior of what it is reporting to the Victron system is 100% the same. They're using the same formulas as for the 10E and 10B BMS, but it's not hard to realize that these three parameters people need to change. And QSO told me, well, the customer needs to tell us what kind of inverter they have, and then they change the parameters for them, and they deliver the battery with the BMS in it, and it has already the right parameters for their system. And I said, well, what happens if there's something is changing? You know, if the customer gets a new inverter, a new system, or wants to move the battery or sell it or something, then it's locked down and nobody can adapt it to a different system then. Or if the customer needs to change the parameters because they don't work anymore, because if the battery cells are aging, these parameters may need some adaptation. And they said, well, we can do a remote session, change the parameters for the customer. This is all far beyond reality. I mean, they want to sell thousands of them per year, I assume, right? So there's no way customers can contact QSO and get this changed in a quick way. And if you want to experiment a bit with these parameters to see what actually works in your system, you cannot expect that they are locked in for 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 hours sometimes. It takes me half a day to figure out what is actually working. You need to wait for the sun coming out. You need to wait for the next day. And this is just not possible. So people need to have access at least to these 3 parameters here on the screen, at least. So I suggested to them, you need to either change your software to make these 3 parameters available to change for everyone, or you have to program your software in that direction that people cannot go over certain thresholds. You know, you cannot put in more than 3.65 volts as the cell over voltage protection, for example. The software doesn't accept any higher value, and nothing lower than 2.5 volts, right? And the same with the temperatures. They cannot go over the specifications of these cells. While within the specifications, they should be able to change all the parameters as per their needs. So there are some solutions available which they can think about. But I think locking down the whole BMS is not one of them. Especially not if they want to prevent warranty claims and set wrong parameters themselves in the BMS. Okay guys, so far this video from today showing you the software of the QSO battery and having a first look at the protection and alarm parameters of the BMS. And as you have seen, I have fully charged the battery now, so I'm waiting for the smart shunt to actually discharge to do the capacity test. And I also want to show you how the Victron system reacts to the QSO battery connected to it via the CAN bus port, and how the Victron system reacts to it. Yes, I have asked QSO and they gave me the password for the BMS to change the parameters, but they also told me not to publish it, so please don't ask me for the password, otherwise I will be in devil's kitchen. Yeah, and as I said at the beginning or in the middle of this video here, it is very, very difficult to communicate with them because all my requests only go to Amy and she asks the technician or engineers. But I think neither her nor the technician or engineer actually understand the consequences of these parameters. So I highlighted all these parameters and said, well, you have to change these parameters. You cannot deliver any batteries with these settings, especially the temperature settings are quite dangerous. They will damage your battery and it's not the customer's or user's fault. This is your own fault. You have set the parameters in the BMS like this. But again, I don't think they understand why they need to change the parameters again. So I just leave it as it is. I can only try so often, and if they don't understand that or the language barrier is too large for them, what can you do? As always, thank you so much for watching. Thanks for all your amazing support. Thanks for all your emails I'm reading. I'm trying to reply to as many emails as possible. But please, if you send me emails, don't expect an answer. And of course, how can I forget the SPET team? Thank you so much for all your donations, buying me beer, keeping me cool down here in sunny hot Australia. Until the next video, guys, you stay charged, stay safe, and thanks again for watching. See you then. Bye-bye.